Okay, welcome to my talk about Queryable APIs with GraphQL. Just quickly, my name is Philip. I work at Red Hat, and I mostly work on Quarkus and on MicroProfile and SmallRye, which is the implementation for MicroProfile. So our agenda for today, we're going to first explain our example just to set the scene or the context. Then we will look at a REST example, how this example is built in JakartaOne. This should describe the problem of over and under fetching. And then we will convert it to GraphQL to see how GraphQL solves this problem. And then we'll look a little bit more at GraphQL and what else we can do. And then we'll take some questions. So let's look at our example. So this example is like a gamification type system. So think of air miles or anything where you get rewarded for doing something. So in our example, we will have a person. So that is describing the actual entity that's taking part, the member or that's part of this membership. And then a score, which is this abstract concept which can score you based on things that you've done. You've flown from here to there, so you get X amount of miles or something like that. Right, so let's start off by looking at the REST example. So from a high level design for this example, we have a REST API for person that connects to a REST to a backend service, not a REST service, just a backend service that talks to a database. We also have a score REST API that talks to a score service. And in our example, the score service is actually a total separate system, and it saves onto a file. And then, of course, we have the models that goes with this. So modeling a person, a pojo that models a person, and a pojo that models a score, and the various other objects. The person object is actually quite big. And this is all based off a real life example that happened to me when I was working at an insurance company. Okay, so let's actually switch to looking at that example. So I already have an application running. It has a REST endpoint that you should be able to see here. And I'm injecting my backend service. And then I have a few methods. I can get all the people. I can get a specific person based on an ID. And you would also see, and I can add a person. And then you would also see annotations for OpenAPI. So what I also added to my application is MicroProfile OpenAPI. So what that allows me to do is if I go to localhost 8080, so I'm using Quarkus, and I can visit the dev UI, and inside the dev UI, I can see my Swagger UI. And because I added MicroProfile OpenAPI, I can see all the endpoints and I can test them. So as an example, we can test persons. So let's get people. So this should get all the people. And you can see it's quite a big response because there's quite a lot of fields on a person. So if you get all the people, it's quite a big response. In my case, I only have 10 people in the database. If I get a specific person, so let's get person 1, I get an error, which is weird because I just got all the people. Let's just try this. And okay, I should have done this before. So I'll continue while this runs in the background. So what you saw there was, if you look at the get persons, we got quite a lot of data back. Now, let's switch back here. So the problem that we want to show, and I'll show the underfetching in a bit, is this overfetching and underfetching. So overfetching means that I fetch way too much data. So in the person example, if I have building a mobile site and I only want the person's name and surname, I get a whole bunch of details back that I don't need. This goes over the wire to my, let's say, mobile phone or website, and then that browser or mobile phone needs to filter it out, so reduce the size on the client side. And overfetching means that that wasn't enough data. I now need to make a subsequent call to go fetch the score, as an example. And the worst is the combination of the two, like I want to show here. So let's see if I can get that example to work quickly. Okay, so while this is happening, I'm going to continue with GraphQL, and I'll come back to this just now. So what we want to do is we want to take this REST example and convert it into a GraphQL endpoint. So what I'll do is I'll just copy it and paste it in here, and we'll call it person GraphQL API. Okay, so let's start modifying this. So first of all, we don't need that. So we don't need to have a path, even though GraphQL is also based on HTTP or can be based on HTTP. It only publishes under /GraphQL. So all I need to do here is add GraphQL API like that. We still want to inject our backend service. Then to get data in GraphQL, it's called a query. So I will just say that this is a query, and similarly, get person will be a query. And I can add a description if I want to. So the difference here is that I don't have to add something to JakartaOne. So as an example, to JakartaOne, I have to add OpenAPI or Swagger to be able to create a schema document. With GraphQL, it's built in. Your endpoints automatically will create a schema. So this description is only for the schema. And I'll show the schema in a bit. Right, so this should already be enough that I can show. Let me just double check. I can take out this because there's no rest in here, but we still want to pass in the ID. And let's remove that. And okay, and then to create a post, we'll get to this in a bit. We can do a mutation. So anything where data changes, it's called a mutation in GraphQL. So if you look at CRUD operations, the create, update, and delete is all a mutation. Let's just see if my problem goes away. Okay, so let's get back to, so we now have a GraphQL API and a REST API. So, oh, sorry, I should have made this bigger. Yep. This is really weird. Let me just quickly see. Do I have duplicates here somewhere? Okay. So we'll just quickly rebuild this application. Of course, you will have to believe me that this just worked half an hour ago. Okay, it looks better. All right. So let's just go back to the REST API and see if we can get a person by ID now. I still get this error. Okay, I'm not too sure why this happens. I can probably quickly fix it just by removing. It's something with addresses, so we can just actually we're not going to demo addresses, so I'll just actually remove it. And see if that solves the problem. Okay. And if it doesn't, we'll just move on. It doesn't. Okay. So anyway, it will do the same as get people, which is for some reason working. So let's look at our GraphQL API. So similar to Swagger UI, in GraphQL, you get a GraphQL UI, which allows you to test your endpoint similarly to Swagger UI. So we'll start off by, okay, so let me first show you the schema. So you'll see that I have a built-in schema, as I said. So this is just documenting it nicely so that you can read it. But you can see I've got query, I've got a mutation. You can see all the types that's been declared. So there's person, and in person, I can see all the things declared. And because I have that insight, I also have insight here. So I can start my query and say, okay, let's get all the people. So similar to what we've done in JakartaOne. And the difference now is that I can say that I want only the names and the surname back for the people. And you can see that now my response is much smaller than in JakartaOne. Now with JakartaOne, if we go back there, after I got a person, I can then get an ID to get a specific score for that person. So and now I can't get that. So let's actually just get it here. So let's say, for example, person 1, we want to get score. So I made a call to my person that for some reason gave me an error now. And then after I got all that data back, filtered it out, I can then use the ID number to get the score back. So then I get the score back. Right. So so we want to do the same for GraphQL, but as you can see here, there's no score yet. So I don't have a score field on people, and there's no score endpoint. So what we can do is we can go to the score REST API, and we can grab this and add this to our endpoint. So we'll add it here. And so we also inject the score backend, and then let's convert this one to GraphQL. The difference here is that I will not make this a query, because what we want to do is we want to say that if somebody asks for a person, they can also add the scores to that person. So we'll say if the source is a person, then add a field called scores onto person, which will return a list of scores. So here we can do person.id number. Okay. So if I go back here, I should now have a score field. Hold on. Yeah. So now I have a scores field, and now I can traverse further into the graph. So name and value. So now I've actually solved over and under fetching, because I can get the people just what I want of people, which is name and surname, and I can add scores. And we can do the same for person. Hopefully this works, because otherwise my whole demo is going to be a problem. Yeah, so I'm not sure why the rest one doesn't work, but anyway, I can get one person and then I can just get exactly what I want. Right, so let's get back to the slides and okay, I'm going to skip this. So this was just quickly going through the history of GraphQL. It's developed by Facebook and open sourced. It's been around for quite a while, publicly since 2015, so nearly 10 years. It's just a specification, so it's hosted by the Linux Foundation. So what we've done is we took our REST design and we've replaced these two, a person and the score, with a person GraphQL API. Right. And then what we've done is if we compare REST, so what happens is a client will ask for a person. The server will go and grab the person, create the output and return that to the client. The client will have to filter out all the stuff that they don't want and then only use the things that they want. It then realizes it also needs score. So it has to make another call, get the score, get that back, filter out what they don't want, and then they have what they want to display. With GraphQL, I can exactly ask what I want. So I can say, I want the names and the score names. The server will get the data and return it back to me, and I can display it. Right. So if we go back to our example of people, and we see that we get quite a lot of people. Now what happens is if I open my log file, let's actually clear it a bit. I'll redo that query. So if I do this, because there's 10 people in, you can see that I got all the people. And then for each score, for each person, I got their scores, which is not efficient because this is the n+1 problem, right? So to solve that, what you can do is you can say, let's pass in a list of people. Right, and we will return a list of scores. So now we can more efficiently do this. So I'll just grab something off here. And now I can get the scores for all the persons in one go. So this is called batching. So if I now redo that call, let's just clear the log a little bit. You will see that I got all the persons and then got the scores back for all of them. So this is called batching in GraphQL. Right. So what you can also do with a source field is add a field. Let me add it first and then I'll show you. So what we want to do is, so like I said, this is like a gamification. Let's say I've traveled on an airplane and I get miles. So as an added benefit, we want to also add the exchange rate for the place that you are flying to. So what we'll do is we'll inject a backend service called exchange rate. And now we want to add exchange rate to person call. But we want to pass in the currency of, why is that not importing currency code? Let's do this. It is there, so I'm not sure why I can't find it. Oh, because it's misspelled, that's why. And now I can say get currency code. So I'm not only saying that if somebody asks for a person, also allow them to ask for the exchange rate given a specific currency. So what that would do here is I should be able to say exchange rate, and now I can say against, let's say, USD, and I just want the rate back. Right, so now I get the exchange rate. We can probably make this person again, person ID1. Right, and now I get the exchange rate back. Right, so next I want to show multiple requests or combined requests. So what you can do is you can actually ask for more than just one thing. So we can name a query. So I can say this is person 1. And we also want to get somebody that's traveling with you maybe. So let's call it person 2 and person 2. And there we only want to get their name and surname. So now I can get that back, right? So I got person 1 with their score and person 2 with just their name and surname. But these objects that I return doesn't have to be of the same type. So I can return different objects based on what I need. So let's add a new service. I'll just copy it in here. So what I've done is I copied this new GraphQL service in, and it will return the weather for a specific city. So we can say that you're traveling to the UK. We're going to show you the exchange rate against the pound, and we will show you the weather in London. So now let's remove person 2 and refresh my schema. Now I can ask for the weather, and I can say this is for London. And let's just get the current temperature back. So now person and weather is 2 separate GraphQL APIs, and I can get both of them back. So I have the weather. Right, so I can also then do something like this where I ask multiple weathers. So maybe it's a multi-city trip. Just see if I'm still... Yeah, actually, before we do that, let's explain one of the issues here is that at the moment, we get the person and the weather the weights for each other. So I first get the weather, and then once I got the weather, then I go get the person. And actually, they can be done concurrently. So what I can do is I can just change this to be returning a completion stage. Or if you are using Quarkus, this can also be a uni. And I can say that person can also become a completion stage. Completion stage person. And yeah, we'll just change it to this. So now I should be able to do those concurrently. So let's refresh here and clear the log a little bit. Yes, so now you can see that I'm getting the person and the weather, and then I get them back. So I'm now making concurrent calls to those. Now, it doesn't have to be just person and weather. Let's say it's a multi-city trip that I'm making. So I'm going to the UK and the US. So this should actually be Great Britain pound. And we can call it, this is the UK exchange rate. And we can actually take that out, and we can say this is London. And then I'm also going to go to the US. So I'll say US and exchange rate against the USD. And we also just want the rate back. And then I also want the weather for that. So let's say I'm going to New York. And New York. So now I should be able to get person and the two weathers concurrently. And then once I have person, I'm going to get the exchange rate. However, this should work. However, these two are still waiting for each other. So it first gets the one and then the second one. So you can also then make a source field be completion stage, or like I said, a uni if you're using Caucus. And I think this has a method that does it. Yeah. Something like that. So now we can do this. Yeah. So it got it back, and you'll see that the exchange rate is getting concurrently. So we can actually quickly recap that. So we started off with also showing collections, so you can get people, and then it gets the exchange rate for each person. So this highlights the n+1 problem. And for that, you can use batching. So what it will do is you will get people, and then you'll batch the source field and get the exchange rate for all the people with one call. You can also do multiple requests. So you can get a person, and then you can get the exchange rate, which is a source on person, but then you can also get the weather. And because these doesn't really have to wait for each other, except exchange rates waiting for person, you can do concurrent requests. So as an example, you can get the person, but concurrently get two weathers. And then once I have person, I can concurrently get all the exchange rates that we need for that person. Right, so what else can we do with GraphQL? We have 15 minutes, so I'll show some of this, and then if we run out of time, we'll just talk about the others. So let's start with mutations. So we've shown how you can get data. Let's change some data. So we already have a mutation on there. Yeah. So we have add person. And this is very similar to the add person that was on REST. It's just changed to mutation. So, did I skip something? I just want to double check. Yeah, actually, before I show mutations, let me quickly show errors and partial responses. So let's see what happens if we get an error. I'll just make this a little bit smaller to highlight what we want to show. So let's get back to this call. I just want the exchange rate. Right, so first of all, if I ask for something that is not there, I will immediately get an error because we have a schema. So the client can validate the call against the schema. And even if I make this call, we'll get an error back, validation error. Right. So that's the first type of error. Now, let's assume the exchange rate service is down, and we'll just simulate that. And we will, let's say, exchange rate, we will throw, well, actually just do a runtime exception for now. So we'll just say throw new runtime exception. And we'll say exchange system is down. Right. So what we'll do is we'll simulate that this backend service might be a total different service or service on the internet or something. And if I run this now, I can still get person back because that system wasn't down. So that's called partial results. And then I got null for exchange rate with the detail in errors. It doesn't say exchange rate is down, it just says system error. And this is because it's a runtime exception. But if we throw a checked exception, so let's change this to that. So exchange rate not available is a checked exception. And now we should get the message in there. Now, this is all configurable in using MicroProfile config. You can configure what you see here because you might not want to leak all of this information. So what I've done in my config is that I've said just show all the fields just for demo purposes. But by default, you wouldn't see all of them because it's a security leak. But you can define which of these fields you want to see because this is quite handy in dev mode where you want to find where the error is and find the path and get the original exception and so on. But in prod, you wouldn't want that necessarily. And similarly, you can configure how a checked exceptions versus a non-checked exception handles it. So by default, runtime exceptions will hide the message like you've seen, and checked exceptions will show them, but you can configure this per exception if you want to. Right, so that's partial responses and errors. Let's quickly look at mutations. So we already have the mutation on here. We've added it when we converted from REST. And there's nothing really to it. You just add mutation. And now I can pass in a person. So let's create a person. So what I'll just copy off here. And so now I'll say that, yeah, so we called it add person. And for now, I'll just create a person with a name. But I'll ask back. So the same as what you can ask certain fields back for a query, you can do the same after you've mutated an object. And we'll ask things back that we haven't created yet. And you can see that the ID has been created because this is a new person that's been added. So once I have an ID, I can actually just do something like this. And that's add person. So this is actually not add person. That's why the previous example, we actually called it update or create person. But now I pass the rest of the information in. But the important part is I'm passing in the ID, so it will do an update. And now you can see that it's created all of that. So you can mutate data. And the same with delete. You can just pass in an ID and delete. Another interesting one, so that's mutations, is subscriptions. So let's look at subscriptions. So that's something that's quite unique to GraphQL, I think, is the fact that you can subscribe to a query. So what you can do is you can say, mark something as a subscription, return multi, and in our case, we'll have this object where every time that something mutates or something changes in the database, we get an event. Our backend system does that for us. So we will then stream this event down, right? So this should be enough. And what I want to do now is I want to start the subscription. So I'll then say that I want to subscribe to that event, the person database event that has a few fields on it, one of them being person. So I can get the event, so what has happened, and then let's say for now we just want the names back. And did I not save? I did not save. So it's now waiting for events to happen. So let's open a new one, and we'll just do it in here. So localhost. Dev UI and GraphQL UI. So what we'll do is we'll do that person one again. We'll create a new person just to change the data. This doesn't have to come from GraphQL. It could be something else, some other process that changes the person. So as soon as that happens, I get the event that a person has been added and the name was Phillip. And similarly, if I update it, so we'll do the same as what we've done earlier. And that's called add person. Hold on. Cut and paste error. Add person. And now we get the update event. So this will just continue watching for changes on the server, and you will receive it until you stop the subscription. Right, so let's look at introspection next. We have some time left, yes. So the one thing that you get, as I said, built in is a schema with GraphQL. But the other interesting thing is that you can actually query the schema using GraphQL. So we can start off by saying that we want to, let's look at the schema. And we want to get all the types that's in the schema, and we want to get their name and their kind. And then we get that back. So, and you can see there's quite a few things that you can ask about that schema, or yeah, there's a few things that you can do with introspection. And that's also how this UI works. So the UI use introspection to allow you to get all the types to give you this code insight, right? So I'll probably just talk through some of the rest. Transformations and mappings allow you to transform. So I have another example on that where you can adapt data. So as an example, in your Java code, you might have your ID as an int, but you actually wanted a string in GraphQL, then you can add this to adapt it to a string. But you can also adapt an actual object using an adapter. So adapt with specific adapter. And then in your adapter, you can define how it maps from and to these objects. So now in Java, you have an address, but in GraphQL, you have a home object. So that's just transforming the actual data in GraphQL. Then clients, I'll just quickly mention. So GraphQL, we also have two clients. One is comparable to the JakartaOne client. So we call that the dynamic client, where you can just put in a query and get the response back. Or there's a type-safe client where it's similar to MicroProfile REST client, where you code this interface and objects, and we'll do the mapping for you. Then we do some integrations. So we integrate with JSONB and Jackson. JSONB from the spec point of view, and Jackson and Quarkus we also support. So that includes the annotations. So as an example, these adapters or transformations, you can also use JSONB adapters. Security, I can probably quickly show. I know we've got 5 minutes left, but I'll quickly show security. So what we can do is we can go back here, or let's do it here first. So let's say we want to do a query, but we say that only a user is allowed to get the scores, right? So we'll do a roles allowed on user on the scores method. Now this won't work yet because we haven't added any security. So what we can do is quickly add OpenID Connect or OpenIDC. Why is it not coming up? OpenID. That's weird. Let's just add it here. So inside our POM, Caucus OpenID Connect, right? So what this will do is it will now restart Caucus and it should add a key cloak for me using dev services and configure it with a user, two users, Bob and Alice, and a group called users. Right, so once that's started up, we can try it out. Key cloak is starting. So we'll do the same query. So we'll do person, let's say ID1, and names. And now we want the scores. And let's just do the name. And you can see that I got unauthorized for that. So what you can do in Caucus is we have a nice OpenID Connect. So I can get into my key cloak and why is that not working? And log in. I'll log in with Bob and Bob. And now, yeah, you can see the access token and you can see that Bob belongs to the group user. And then you'll also see that we have a link here to both Swagger UI and GraphQL UI that will log me into this. So now it adds this authorization header. So if I make this call now I can get it back. So that's security. I think we're out of time. I think we need to get back to questions. Let's see if there were any questions. Oh, no questions in the chat. Yeah, I think we can then quickly just talk through this. So I've shown security. We also do context propagation. So especially when we do these concurrent requests where we return a uni or a multi or something like that, the context will still be propagated. You can use bean validation. So in your parameters, you can do bean validation. If it fails, you'll get partial responses back or errors, depending on where in the query you are. It's integrated with metrics, so both small array and micrometer. It's integrated with tracing. And then another interesting thing is generics. You can use generics. And what I'll refer you to is this example of mine. Let me actually show it here. So if you go to this URL or that QR code, you will get to the example that I've shown, but it also has a whole bunch of other examples like the generics one or some other examples. I think my time is up. Thank you.